A federal hearing room. Fluorescent lights. Camil sits across from 3 senior FBI officials. Her face is unreadable. The folder in front of them is thick. They asked her one question. Just one. In the 26 days you were held by Seok Yi's organization, did he ever give you a reason to believe he wanted out? The room was so quiet she could hear the air conditioning hum. She thought about the satellite phone on the table. The 48 hours she had asked for. The way he had looked at her when she walked out. Not relieved, not triumphant. Just watching. Like a man memorizing something he knows he'll never see again. She thought about the lie in her field report. The coordinates she never gave. The truth she had locked somewhere no debrief would ever reach. No, she said. He didn't. She believed about half of that answer. 3 weeks later, Seok Yi's network executed its largest single shipment in 5 years. Right through a corridor the FBI had left unwatched. And Camil realized something that kept her awake every night after that. He hadn't disappeared because he was running from her. He had disappeared because he was waiting for her to come find him. Last time we left Agent Camil Jackson standing at a crossroads that no training manual had ever prepared her for. 26 days inside Seok Yi's compound had done what 10 years of surveillance, RICO filings and failed raids never could. It had made him real to her. Not a case number. Not a photograph on a corkboard. A person. One with a history she understood on a level that frightened her more than any weapon his men had ever pointed at her. She walked out. She told her debrief what they needed to hear. She filed a report that was technically accurate and completely dishonest. And then she went back to her desk, her case files, her wall of evidence, and she tried very hard to be the agent she had always been. It didn't work. Because the thing about spending 26 days with the most intelligent, most dangerous, most unexpectedly human person you have ever met is this. You don't get to unknow them. And somewhere out there Seok Yi was moving again. Bigger. Bolder. Like a man with nothing left to lose. Or like a man who had just decided for the first time in his life, exactly what he was willing to risk. This is part 2. And the rules have changed for both of them. The internal review lasted 11 days. 11 days of questions, polygraphs, psychological evaluations, and carefully worded implications that she had been compromised. She answered everything with the precision of someone who had spent a decade learning exactly how much truth a federal report could hold without collapsing under its own weight. They found nothing. What they found instead was a decorated agent with a spotless record, a convincing account of her captivity, and zero actionable intelligence on Seok Yi's primary facility, which they concluded she had genuinely never been allowed to identify. That part was true. She had never been given the coordinates. She simply hadn't asked for them either. Her supervisor reinstated her with full clearance and a mandatory 2-week administrative leave. "Take a breath, Camil," he said. "You earned it." She spent the 2 weeks in her apartment running her 5 miles every morning, and doing something she had never done before in 10 years on the case. She pulled every file they had on Seok Yi's origin. Not the empire. The man. Before the money, before the network, before America. Busan. The factory. The father. She wasn't building a case. She was trying to understand something that had no place in any report she would ever write. Why she missed the conversations. While Camil sat in administrative leave, Seok Yi's network did not pause to mourn her absence. The shipment that moved 3 weeks after her release was not reckless. It was a statement. 1,400 kilos of cocaine, routed through a freight corridor the Bureau had quietly deprioritized in the fallout from the failed Nevada raid. Clean. Untraceable. Moving like the network had never been touched. Because it hadn't been. That was the thing her colleagues kept missing. The raid hadn't hurt the empire. It had revealed something more disturbing. The empire was designed to absorb disruption. Seok Yi had built redundancy into every layer. You could remove any single piece and the machine kept running. You could remove him and it would still run. That was the most frightening thing about his organization, and the most revealing thing about its architect. He hadn't built a criminal enterprise that needed him. He had built one that could survive without him, which meant he had always known he might one day choose to step back. Or be taken away. When Camil read the intelligence report on the shipment, she circled one detail and stared at it for a long time. The corridor the shipment moved through. She had flagged it for surveillance 18 months ago. The flag had been deprioritized in the restructuring after the raid. He had known it would be. He had planned around her absence before she had even left. It came through a channel so clean she almost missed it. A tip routed through a third-party informant to a street-level contact to a junior analyst on her team. 4 degrees of separation, each link legitimate enough to survive a source audit. By the time it reached Camil's desk, it looked exactly like routine intelligence. Except for one thing. The tip used a phrase, buried in a location description, casual, easy to overlook, that she and Seok Yi had used in a conversation during her 26th night in the compound. A phrase she had never written in any report. A phrase no one else on Earth could have known. She read it 3 times. Then she closed the file, walked to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists, and looked at herself in the mirror for a full minute. He was communicating with her. Not through backdoors or encrypted channels that the Bureau might intercept. Through the case itself. He had found a way to reach her using the very machinery of the investigation as his messenger. The tip contained coordinates. Not for a facility, she knew better than to expect that. For a location. A public one. A specific time 3 days from now. She should have reported it immediately. She opened her desk drawer instead. Took out the photograph. Him at the warehouse fire 10 years ago, and set it next to the file. She had 72 hours to decide whether she was still an FBI agent or something else entirely. She went alone. She told no one. Not her partner, not her supervisor, not even the junior analyst who had passed her the tip. She wore civilian clothes, no wire, no backup weapon beyond her service piece. She told herself it was because a wire would compromise the encounter. She knew the real reason was something she wasn't ready to say out loud. The location was a public parking structure in downtown Las Vegas. 3rd level. 6:47 p.m. She was there at 6:39, running her sight lines by habit, her body doing the job her mind was busy arguing about. He arrived at exactly 6:47. He looked the same. That was the first thing she registered. Unreasonable and irrelevant and true. Same unhurried movement. Same complete ease inside his own skin. He wore a gray jacket. He looked like a man who had just finished a business meeting and had somewhere comfortable to be afterward. You came, he said. I shouldn't have. No, he agreed. But you're here. Which means something changed. Nothing changed. He looked at her for a moment. The way he always looked at her, like he was reading something she hadn't meant to write. You read the Busan files, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. And the silence that followed confirmed everything he needed to know. Walk with me, he said. 10 minutes. Then you can arrest me or walk away. Your choice as always. She walked. He told her the part of the story she hadn't been able to find in any file. After his father's addiction destroyed the family, Seok Yi had spent 2 years in Los Angeles working legitimate jobs. Warehouses, restaurants, construction, while studying the pharmaceutical supply chain that had gutted his neighborhood back in Busan. He had not come to America to build a drug empire. He had come to understand one. What he found was a system so normalized, so legally protected, so deeply embedded in the machinery of commerce that no amount of law enforcement pressure would ever touch its architects. The people profiting most from addiction wore suits and sat on boards of directors and donated to political campaigns. I made a choice, he said as they moved through the structure's 2nd level, voices low. Not the right one. I know that. But I made it with full understanding of what I was choosing and what I was choosing against. That's more than most people in this industry, legal or not, can say. You're asking me to excuse you because you're self-aware, Camil said. I'm asking you to see me clearly, he said. There's a difference. They stopped at the far end of the level. The city spread out below them through a gap in the concrete. Las Vegas at dusk, lights beginning to surface through the fading sky. I want out, he said. Quietly. Like the words had weight he had been carrying for longer than she knew. Not a deal. Not protection. Clean. And I need someone I trust to tell me if that's even possible. Camil stared at the city. Her heart was doing something complicated. Why me? You already know why. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she doubted what he had said. She had spent enough years reading people to know when someone was performing sincerity and when they were simply, painfully telling the truth. What kept her awake was the architecture of the situation itself. Because whether Seok Yi meant every word, and she believed he did, what he was asking her to do was still profoundly impossible. An FBI agent cannot negotiate an informal exit for a federal criminal. There is no mechanism for, "I want out, help me disappear cleanly." There is a witness protection program which requires full cooperation and testimony, names, locations, supply chains, every lieutenant, every contact, every ghost company. Cooperation that would dismantle an empire that currently employed in some form hundreds of people who had nowhere else to go. Or there was nothing. She thought about the compound. The people there who moved with purpose and a strange, earned loyalty. She thought about what happened to organizations when they were dismantled overnight. How the vacuum filled always with something worse. She thought about her badge. He thought about the photograph. By 4 a.m. she had arrived at the same conclusion from 3 different directions. There was no clean answer. There never had been. That was the trap, not one Seok Yi had set, but one that the world had built long before either of them entered it. She laced up her running shoes in the dark. 5 miles. And then she was going to do something she had never done in 10 years. She was going to ask for help. His name was Marcus Webb. 22 years in federal prosecution, the last 6 as a special counsel on organized crime cases. He had worked with Camil twice. Briefly, transactionally, professionally. He was the kind of man who knew exactly which rules bent and which ones didn't, and he never confused the two. She called him at 7 a.m. She said she needed a hypothetical conversation completely off the record. He said those were his favorite kind. She laid it out without names. A high-level operator with no direct blood on his hands, no violence record, significant intelligence value, expressing a genuine desire to exit the enterprise. Not cooperate, not testify, not take a deal, simply cease and transfer operational control in a way that collapsed rather than transferred the network. Webb was quiet for a long time. "That's not a deal the government offers," he said. "I know. But there are mechanisms," he said slowly, "for intelligence-adjacent arrangements. Things that happen quietly and are never filed under Title 18. Things that require someone very senior to decide the outcome serves a larger strategic interest." Pause. "How real is this?" "Real enough that I'm calling you at 7 in the morning." Another pause. She could hear him thinking, the particular silence of a man mapping consequences. "Give me something concrete," he said. "Not testimony. Evidence. Something I can put in front of the right person and make the case that a quiet resolution serves more than a loud prosecution." "And if I can't?" "Then we never had this conversation," he said. "And your hypothetical friend runs out of runway." She met Seok Yi again 4 days later. Different location. A Korean restaurant in Henderson midday, busy enough to be anonymous, quiet enough to talk. He told him about Webb. Not his name, she wasn't ready to give him that, but the shape of what was possible. The narrow, unofficial, extraordinarily precarious path that might exist if he was willing to do something harder than cooperation. "I don't mean testimony," she said. "I mean controlled collapse. You hand over the architecture, not the people, the structure. Supply chain maps, shell company trees, distribution routes. Enough that when the network stops functioning, there's nothing left for anyone else to inherit. It dies clean." He listened without interrupting. That was something she had learned about him. He never performed attention. When he listened, he was completely present. "What do I get?" he asked. "Quiet," she said. "No prosecution, no deal, no record. You become someone else. Somewhere else. The case goes cold officially. The network collapsed on its own, the principal fled jurisdiction. You disappear for real this time. And you." "I closed the case. The one I've had for 10 years. She met his eyes. "We both get to stop." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the restaurant window, Henderson moved through its ordinary afternoon. Traffic, sunlight, people with uncomplicated lives. "You're offering me freedom," he said. "I'm offering us both a way out." He looked at her the way he always looked at her. "Give me 72 hours, he said. The 72 hours passed in a silence so complete it felt like holding her breath underwater. On the morning of the 3rd day, a package arrived at Camille's home address. Not her office, her home, which meant he had known it for longer than she was comfortable thinking about. Inside, a single USB drive. No note. She plugged it in at her personal laptop, not a bureau machine. What she found was not what she had expected. It was everything. Not a partial map. Not a negotiating chip. Every shell company, every supply route, every distribution node, every communication protocol his network used, compiled with the precision of someone who had spent years documenting his own operation as if he always knew this day would come. It was, she realized slowly, the most complete piece of organized crime intelligence the FBI had ever not officially received. There was one file separate from the rest. A single document. She opened it. It was a letter. Not long, half a page. He wrote the way he spoke. No excess, no performance. He told her that he had made his decision the night she walked out of the compound. That everything since had been the working out of logistics. That the empire was already in controlled dissolution. Lieutenants quietly paid off, supply chains deliberately fractured, the machine winding down from the inside out. The last line read, "You asked me once why you. The answer is the same now as it was then. Because you were the only person who came close enough to see me. Not the case. Me. And I needed to give that back to someone before I disappeared." Camil sat with the drive in her hand for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Marcus Webb. The case closed quietly 6 months later. Officially, network collapsed, principal fled jurisdiction, file archived. Unofficially, the most sophisticated drug distribution empire the American Southwest had ever produced dismantled itself from the inside, leaving nothing for anyone else to inherit. Agent Camil Jackson received a commendation. She requested immediate reassignment. No one ever found Seok Yi. No one ever found the letter either. He kept it. If part 2 hit harder than part 1, if you felt the weight of every choice she made, every line she crossed, every truth she couldn't put in a report, then you understand exactly why this story isn't over. Because we haven't talked about what happened 6 months later. When the case was officially closed. When Camil took her new assignment in a city 3,000 miles from Nevada. And when a familiar face walked into a coffee shop 2 blocks from her new apartment. Subscribe right now because part 3 is coming and it starts exactly where you think the story ended. Drop a comment. Did Seok Yi earn his freedom? Or did Camil just become everything she spent a decade fighting against? Share this with someone who needs a story that doesn't take the easy way out. Because this one never does.